Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure having you all. Thank you for being with us to share tonight our experience with the new technology that we just introduced a few months ago. I'm sure you will hear some important information. We will have two speakers. I would have loved to speak to you, but I think I get already too old for that. I already talk too much. I think it is better to give the microphone to other people to talk. We have two speakers today. Alan Ponter is the guy from the company who is behind this technology. He has an academic post at Kent University, and he is the Illumina man. The company is called Illumina. He will be talking about the technology. Generally, please give him a very hard time. Don't let him enjoy his talk very much. And then Dr. Ghazi will be talking about our own experience. Our own experience is not a very huge experience, but you will know very well. We started our genetic laboratory. This year, we are 20 years in the business. I will not say we are expert, but I would say we have a reasonable experience to allow us to express the service that we offer to the people, the result, the outcome, and I think it is for you to realize that we have a good service, and I would say that it will only get better because science only gets better with all new invention. So I will leave the stage for you. Have you on? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here again. It's my second time in Saudi and second time in Jeddah. Yes, I work for Illumina, but I've had a long career in both academia and clinical embryology. So I'm speaking to you as a clinical embryologist tonight, not the Illumina man. I'll try and decrease the number of references to Illumina as we go through, because it's really not necessarily about the particular technology, it's about the approach. So I've called my talk Next Generation IVF, because although we're using next generation sequencing, it's a sort of play on words, it's really about how we can improve IVF, how we can take it to the next level. But before I do that, I just want to tell you about the range of products that we make at Illumina. And just to show you that it's not just about IVF, it's not just about that part of reproduction. Really, you can think of reproduction as a kind of life cycle. This is drawn as a line. Unfortunately, it's not coming out too well. That's better, thank you. But you can think about here, we've got a lady or a couple who want to conceive, and they may have carrier screening. Then we go through to conception, and that's the part I'm going to focus on today, the IVF part. Then we get through to pregnancy. We might do a non-invasive prenatal test, or a conventional prenatal test, right through to newborn and the genetic tests that are involved there. And I know that the laboratories of Summer are investing in all of those different approaches. And then finally through to a child or an adult, and looking at the disease they may carry, and then back around again to carrier screening. And that's a really important point for both the company, what we're trying to do, that we're really invested in this space of reproductive and genetic health, just like you are. And also to reflect the fact that in a country like Saudi Arabia, there's a burden of genetic disease, there's a lot of consanguinity, and so we need some very high technology to try and help us with those particular cases. But as I said, I'm going to speak predominantly about IVF, and the three products that we make, or the three product areas, are PGS, for PGS, antibody screening, and that's an array-based solution called 24 Sure. And the take-home message is that most of the world's antibody screening to date has been done either by fish or latterly 24 chromosomes using array CGH. So most of the data that is out there, and I'm going to share some with you tonight, is 24 short data. But this is transitioned into our next generation sequencing product called VeriSeq PGS, which is what's currently being used, I'm happy to say. The other area is translocations. Obviously, this is a relatively common problem in the normal population, and particularly in the infertile population. And we have a product, an array product, 24 short plus. Now, interestingly, VeriSeq PGS can also do this job. It's not validated for it, and according to Illumina, that's not what it should be used for. But lots of customers are now using VeriSeq. Lots of customers are now using VeriSeq for their translocation cases. And then finally, and I've got a couple of slides on this, something that's very important in Saudi, as I said, is looking at single gene disorders. So obviously where there's a burden of genetic disease, a high level of consanguinity, then we really need a solution to help couples who are at risk of transmitting a severe inherited disease. And that product is a linkage-based array product called carrier mapping. So I'm just going to briefly go through this, this test, just in very broad brushstrokes. It's a comprehensive PGD solution for single gene disorders, and it's the first of its type, because until today, every PGD test has involved making basically a brand new test for every couple, unless the same mutation was present in the couple. So just a little historical perspective, the first PGD case successfully done was back in the 90s, it was done in the late 80s, but successfully published and babies born in the 90s, and those are the first twins that were born from an X-linked case of adrenal leukodystrophy. Those are the actual embryos that were biopsied. So things have not changed too much. The embryos look the same, the babies look the same. Alan Handyside, who works at Illumina now, we've worked together for many years. At the time though, the important thing is the test was very basic. So it was really the presence or absence of a band on a gel, telling you the gender of the embryo, which told you whether it was available or not. But things soon moved on. So, we fast forward another 20 or so years, and we've got a very complex set of markers to look for not only a mutation in, let's say, beta thalassemia, in this case, in the beta globin gene, but also to HLA match to provide stem cells to help an existing sick child. So as you can see, this is very complex and requires a lot of workup and a lot of interpretation, a lot of manual interpretation. So now, I'm not going to go into too much technical detail because that would be a talk in itself, but we now have a solution whereby we can use one test off the shelf. We can take blood from mother, father, and a known reference. That could be an affected child, it could be an unaffected child, or it could be a family member who's closely related, and we can establish phase. So in other words, we can establish what chromosome the mutation is on. And the colours haven't come out very well, but as you can see, these chromosomes, which belong to the chromosome in question, let's say it's chromosome 7 for cystic fibrosis, have been inherited from the mother and the father, but they don't get inherited as a whole chromosome. Because of recombination, you get a bit of this chromosome, a bit of that chromosome in the paternal chromosome. But basically, by using this system, you can read across the chromosomes and say, have I got this chromosome from dad, or this chromosome from dad? In other words, have I got the mutation from dad, or the wild-type allele from dad? And by doing that, you can score the embryos. So you don't need to look at the mutation, it's just a linkage test. But the beauty of it is by looking at all 300,000 SNPs across the genome that are on this test, you can just home in on the region of interest that you want to examine for that particular disease. So you don't need a new test for every disease. The benefits to the patient are quite dramatic, and having worked in an IVF lab and a PGD lab, and seen how long it takes to develop a new test for a particular couple, the benefits are very clear. The workup's much quicker, there's less waiting time for patients. There's improved coverage by having 300,000 SNPs when you only need, say, 10 markers to give you security of your confidence in your test. It means you get improved accuracy. There's a standard workflow, it's an off-the-shelf test, it's not a special test made for an individual patient, and that gives you improved reliability and reproducibility. Now, all of us in this room are patients at some point in their life, not necessarily infertility patients, just patients. When I see a doctor and he says, I want you to have this test, I'd quite like to know that 1,000 people have had the test before me. I don't want a special test for me. And in effect, to date, what we've been offering PGD patients is a special test just for them, first time being used. And I don't think that necessarily provides the best security and confidence. It's been validated. It's now been used in thousands of clinical cases, but the publication in 2014, and we can make this available to you afterwards if you need it, gave 98% concordance with the gold standard, which is STRs plus mutation analysis. And in fact, the 2% discordance were later found by another technique to be accurate in carrier mapping and not accurate in the other gold standard test. And large reference labs around the world now have adopted carrier mapping as their method of choice for PGD in more than 95% of their cases. So I don't want to say universal, but it's a comprehensive test. But now I want to share what I really wanted to talk about, which I think we can all in this room make the biggest impact. And I want you to feel a little bit uncomfortable at times, and I want you to think about your specific situation and reflect on that. So in a sense, I'm going to be asking you questions, and we're not going to play question and answer, but in your mind, I want you to answer and think, what number am I thinking of in my head, or what answer am I giving in my head, and then see whether you were right or not. So, unfortunately, the map of the world hasn't come up here, but this is just to give you an idea of the number of IVF cycles done around the world. We estimate that about 1.4 million IVF cycles are done globally every year. And you can see how they're split up into different regions. Unfortunately, the Saudi flags have become yellow there, which I apologise for, it should be green. And I've estimated that there's 20,000 cycles occurring in Saudi Arabia. I'd love it if one of you afterwards, as Dr. Samir said, gives me a hard time and says, no, it's not, it's 10,000. I'd like to know that number, because I'm not sure anybody knows that number today. So, really what I want to stress, though, is that the different success rates in different countries, there's a huge variation, not just in different countries, even in the same country. And this, to me, represents a problem. You know, I've been an embryologist for 20 years, and we're all thinking we're doing a great job, but the reality is the success rates globally, on average, have not changed very much. And that's a problem, and we need to do something about it. So this is something I normally do a quiz on. I say, what country do you think, so there's a few countries represented on the map, what country do you think between 2010 and 2014 had only a 1% increase year-on-year live birth rate? So most people, most audiences, they think of a country that's developing and they say, oh, it must be a developing country. That's the UK. So that's the United Kingdom. So I don't think that's very good. And that's where IVF started. Then I would say, here's another country. Which country has, between two clinics, a difference in clinical pregnancy rate per cycle started for under 35-year-old patients of 21% in one centre and 67% in another centre, 3 times as high. Again, they usually say, oh, I don't know, maybe that's India, maybe that, and I say, no, that's the US. So that's probably a bit of a surprise to you. And those centres are separated by 100 miles. And this is a country that, you know, claims to have the highest success rates in the world. And then this is the multiple pregnancy rate, which is now in many countries considered a bad outcome in IVF, not something to be aimed for, but something to be avoided. So certainly in the West, this is considered something that the lower it is, the better, as long as you can maintain success rates. So these are 3 different countries, and I'll give you the answer. 15% is the UK. We've worked very hard to reduce it from about 25%. 26% won't come as a surprise, it's the USA. And 5% is either Australia or Finland. So they've really tackled the problem well, and they still get very good success rates. So if your aim is to produce a singleton healthy baby, then you need to be getting those low twin rates, and there may be ways to do that. And hopefully in the talk I can share some of those ways. So more numbers, I've already told you 1.4 million is the global number of IVF cycles, and I've estimated 20,000 for Saudi. The sad reality today, across all countries, across all patients, is the average take-home baby rate is 1/3. So you're more likely to fail if you go for IVF than you are to succeed. Well, we don't tell our patients that, do we? We don't. We say, come in, you know, we'll do our best, here's some success rates to show you, here's some global figures. We don't say, probably you're not going to go home with a baby, or you need to do many cycles to get your baby. So we need to address this. 200,000 is the number I've estimated, the number of embryos produced per week around the world. So I want you to think about the scale of this problem. And as a rule of thumb, more than 50% of embryos are abnormal, aneuploid, chromosomally aneuploid. They really have no chance of producing a healthy, normal baby. So that means from that 200,000, that more than 100,000 abnormal embryos are produced every week around the world. And we now know that only 5% at best of all of those embryos are being tested by PGS, by chromosome testing. And probably in Saudi it's probably less. It's probably less than 1%. I don't know the exact number. I know that in the UK it's only 1%. So some facts about aneuploid in embryos. So this is really important, even if this is not your subject area. It's the main reason for failed implantation and development to term. That's an indisputed fact. Even people who don't believe in PGS agree with that statement. So if we all are on the same page about that, we all should be on the page saying we need to do something about it. Maybe the something is PGS, maybe it's something else. But I'm here to tell you, I think it's PGS. At least number one is PGS. Maybe there's other things too. You could also look at it as the most common genetic problem in humans. Normally we think of a problem we see in a child as a common genetic problem. But given that these are all potential humans, embryos, then clearly the most common genetic problem is having aneuploidy as an embryo. We now know it's present even in young women, noocytomas. So that means all the people we thought were good prognosis actually have a high rate of aneuploidy. Depends what you class as high, but I would say a high genetic risk is anything above 20%. If you said to someone you've got a 1 in 5 chance or 1 in 4 chance of something happening, I think they think that's quite a high risk. Well, that's what the aneuploidy rate is in young people and donors. I said already it's maybe half of all embryos, and that increases with maternal age. And even children know that. They don't know about chromosomes, but they know that as women age, it's harder for them to get pregnant. So this is something we've known for probably centuries. We also now know from embryology that developing an embryo to its most developed in culture, in a dish, doesn't get rid of chromosome abnormalities. It gets rid of some, but it doesn't get rid of specific abnormalities. For example, trisomy 21. You could put any abnormality in that bracket there, but it's still apply. Another thing that was controversial is whether the incidence between stimulated cycle and a natural cycle is different. There was some evidence a few years ago saying maybe natural cycles have lower incidence of aneuploidy, and we're just creating aneuploidy. But there's more data. I put a question mark because it's not proven yet. There's more data coming out saying actually the incidence is still pretty low in natural cycles. And what a lot of doctors today call a natural cycle actually just means they use low stimulation. So I'm not against low stimulation. I'm just thinking, what do we have to do to get the best result for the patient quickest? Because patients usually want answers quickly. So in reality, this is the world we live in today. We live in a world where you look at embryos and you say, that one looks nice, that one doesn't look nice. And there's quite a lot of evidence now. And I've done that. I'm not pointing fingers at people in this room and saying, isn't it ridiculous that you do that? I've done it myself. I believe that I can pick an embryo better than somebody else. But the evidence says that I can't. I can pretty much get an idea of what's going to fail in a dish, but I can't pick between the ones that look quite good. And so they're all speaking to you saying, choose me, choose me. And this is happening 50,000 times a day across the world. Okay? And it's time to do something different. So this is a real case. I normally do this quiz, but we'll go through it very quickly. This is a real case from the Bridge Centre when I worked in London. A 38-year-old patient, which would be considered advanced maternal age in the UK. I know it might be a slightly lower age in this region. She's got 10 day 3 embryos, and you have to select the worst 2 and the best 2. So the worst 2 you get rid of, the best 2 you choose for transfer, and the rest you freeze. I've done this test hundreds of times, and nobody gets the worst embryos wrong. So think of it in your mind, I won't test you, but everybody says 7 and 10 are the ones I don't want, and they're correct. But then when I say which embryos do you want to transfer, there's a lot of difference in the room. People say, oh, well, number 2 looks pretty good, number 8 looks good, and I can, some of you are embryologists in the room. You can even do this with people who've never seen an embryo before, and they will still make the same kind of decisions. When we tested these, using fish, but following up with the whole embryo, those are the results we got. So 7 and 10 was a good choice to deselect those embryos. But I'm pretty sure that whatever you chose of the other embryos, you may have made a mistake. You may have transferred a trisomy 21 embryo, which wouldn't have been good. Most likely fail, but worst case scenario, have an abnormal child. I should have said, 4, 5, and 8, it hasn't come up on this slide, were normal. Normal for the 5 chromosomes tested. 5 and 8 were transferred, and she had a twin pregnancy and healthy children. I would say we helped it on its way. We were lucky because we did test for all the chromosomes. And we now know you have to test for all the chromosomes to get a comprehensive answer. So what about time-lapse? I know time-lapse has taken the world, the embryology world by storm. I'm not against time-lapse. I think it's going to have some huge value within the lab. I think it might be a quality assurance type test where you can see very subtle changes in embryos and see whether your system is working perfectly. But in reality, what we now know, if you do the same quiz, if you like, as I did before, you say, I've got 2 embryos, I'm going to watch their life cycle. Oops, that didn't work. Let's see if that actually works. I just want to show you what the embryos look like. You get to the end of the video, and you see one embryo looks a lot better than the other as a blastocyst. And I asked the question, which one would you choose? And most people say, okay, the one on the left. That looks nicer, looks faster. But it turned out to be trisomy 21. But why shouldn't we be surprised? A trisomy 21 embryo will produce a baby. So why would it look an abnormal embryo? Everyone in this room has been a blastocyst during their life. So, right? So we've all been blastocysts. And so have many babies that have been born being a blastocyst. So clearly there's going to be something very, very subtle to be able to determine an abnormal embryo that can produce a baby and a normal embryo that can produce a healthy baby. So the message here is time-lapse does not help you choose specific aneuploidies. It might help general aneuploidy, but not specific aneuploidy. So I think maybe how we're going to use time-lapse in the future, apart from quality assurance, is by combining it with PGS. So once I've got a euploid embryo, don't forget that all of the data from time-lapse today is a mixture of aneuploid and euploid embryos. Wouldn't it be great to say, okay, I'm not interested in aneuploid embryos, they're never going to become normal humans, so why am I interested? I'm going to take the euploid ones that give me a chance to have a normal baby, and I'm going to see whether time-lapse works on those. And there's a little bit of data, not very much, saying that that might help you choose an embryo. And that makes sense, because it's not all about PGS, it's not all about your chromosomes. You need to have good gene expression, you might need mitochondria at a certain level, not sure yet, but you said you need something else apart from aneuploidy. But aneuploidy is what you call the trump card, it's the most important thing today. So why would you offer PGS in the IVF clinic? Well, if we're creating all these abnormal embryos, then we've got to stop transferring them, freezing them, and storing them, because that's a great expense to the patient, and it's a waste of time. Every test we ever do in genetics, we want to give information. Maybe we can determine the chance for live birth. I don't think it's that clear. I think it's very hard to get prognostic indicators for IVF, but it's an option. I think we can provide closure for women who have high aneuploidy rates. I personally have consulted with 2 patients, one of whom was 49, one was 31. I said to both of them, I don't think we should do PGS. I think we're going to get all abnormal embryos. Don't waste your money, go and do something else. They insisted, more than insisted, you know what I mean. We did it, they're all abnormal. And then one of them said, I still don't believe it. So, what can you do when someone says, I still don't believe it? We were testing eggs at the time, and she said, I want you to test all my embryos as well, from those eggs. So we tested all the embryos from the eggs, and they were exactly the same results, which didn't surprise me. So, sometimes you need to give people information so they say, okay, I understand now, I'm going to do something different. But the thing people are really after is increasing pregnancy or live birth rates per embryo transfer or per cycle. I put it in bold because it's probably the most important thing, but it's also something that we do have evidence for. So, thankfully, we have evidence. Maybe we need more evidence, but we have some. The other one is reducing the miscarriage rate. I think this is often put to one side, like it's not that important. But I'm not a woman, I'm never going to be pregnant, and I'm never going to have a miscarriage. But if I had to bet, I would say this is something women do not want to do. They don't want to have a miscarriage. So if we have a test that can avoid that, surely we should do that. Another softer outcome is reducing time to live birth. And we don't have any data on this yet, but it's pretty clear that if you use a selection technique and you avoid transferring things that are going to fail, you'll reduce the time it takes to get to your live birth, which is the desired outcome. Similarly, we could reduce the dropout rate in IVF for patients. I've heard a lot of centres around the world saying, oh, we treated this patient 13 times. Well, apart from the cost and the emotion and the physical part of it, why would anyone want to do that many IVF cycles if they could have just done a couple? And potentially, and I'll show you a slide later, we might be able to actually reduce the cost for patients versus doing multiple rounds of IVF or frozen embryo transfer by selecting the best embryo from the beginning. And then finally, I did mention that we tried to reduce multiple pregnancy. Well, if you can select the best embryo, you can transfer only one embryo. And in those cases, you can then reduce the incidence of twins and all the morbidity and mortality associated with twin pregnancy. And I put a star there because that's part of what we're doing for our randomized control trial. So we're often asked, and in the field, if you offer PGS, you're often asked, well, is there more data coming out? I'm going to share some data, but we've got a big trial coming out, which should finish at the end of this year. Let's hope and assume that it's positive and it comes out the way we're hoping. If it does, I think it's going to really transform the way people look at PGS. So what are the results from 24 chromosome screening? And as I said, there's different techniques. So I've put all of the evidence, or at least the highlighted evidence, and it's in a sense platform independent, so I'm not focusing on one particular test. So the first one, this is probably my favourite one, because I'm originally a mouse geneticist, and so all the experiments I did are using mice that are very similar and then changing one thing and seeing what the outcome is. We can't do that in humans for obvious reasons, but also humans are not as similar as the mice we work with. So why I like this is this is a case where the two study arms are actually quite similar, so much more like mice. They're young, again, Western young, under 35, good prognosis patients, first time IVF, normal karyotype, and they had day 5 biopsy and a single embryo transfer with or without PGS. And the increase with PGS was a 65% relative increase in ongoing pregnancy rate. I urge you at any conference you ever go to, if somebody was selling something that would give you a 65% relative increase in pregnancy rate, you would be grabbing it and buying it on the spot. You know, and most people who come to us and show us a new dish, a new medium, and so on, they're nowhere near 60% increase. So this is a small but good randomized controlled trial. We're trying to replicate it, so I hope we'll have more data in the future. This one is using QF-PCR, so a PCR technique slightly different. But this is blastocyst biopsy using, they call it CCS here, but it's the same thing, and a fresh embryo transfer in a much more normal patient population, under 43, showing an increase in live birth rates. I've got all the references here so you can look them up afterwards if you need to. This one is showing that a single normal euploid embryo transferred gives you the same success rate as 2 untested blastocysts. So you get the same success rate for only 1 embryo. You know, you get the best for only 1. But the difference is you don't get any twins, whereas in the 2 embryo transfer, you get 50% twins. Now, if you want to make twins, that's fine. If you're trying to avoid twins, that's a bad idea. This is the reason I'm showing these two is these still use day 3 biopsy, and I know day 3 biopsy is still very common and prevalent here. So I wanted to kind of reassure you, because you'll hear at lots of international conferences people saying, day 3 biopsy's gone, everything's day 5. And if you ask me, which would I choose if I had 1 embryo in each hand and I could only test 1? Honestly, I would say a day 5. But if my reality, the reality I was living was we do a lot of day 3 and we're moving to day 5, but today we're day 3, I'd ask the question, is it harmful to do day 3? Is there any evidence that says it could be beneficial? And I think these 2 papers from the EVI group in Spain demonstrate that whether it's male factor or advanced maternal age, if you do it properly and use 24 chromosomes, you can get an improved outcome in terms of live birth and reduced miscarriage. So those are going to be published, they're nearly complete now, they're going to be published hopefully this year. So they're again, it's all 24 chromosomes. Of these studies, 3 meta-analyses have been done, all showing, not surprisingly, that there's a positive outcome for PGS. Ongoing randomized control trials. So we've not given up and said we've done enough, you should just be doing PGS now. We're doing trials to demonstrate this. There's the STEAM polar body trial. There's a Beacon trial in China using NGS, next generation sequencing. Richard Scott's doing another poor prognosis patient trial. IVF Sweden's doing a 24 short trial on blastocysts. And I mentioned the Illumina STAR trial, which is using Veriseq, which I'll talk about in a second. So looking at all the 24 chromosomes with next generation sequencing, single embryo transferred after it's been frozen. Okay, so very, very specific. And the results of that should come out at the end of the year. But the message I really want to drive home is every single RCT that has been done using 24 chromosome screening has been positive. So the days of, the Marston trial and the fish using 5 chromosomes on cleavage stage embryos showing harm or no improvement, those days are gone. we're not in that reality today. We're in this reality. This reality is every single trial has shown positive improvement. So you can wait for more trials, or you can say, actually, I think the weight of evidence is coming now. That's all trial data, and some people are critical of trial data. They say only the best groups are involved in trials. What about the rest of us who aspire to be the best groups? So what about real-world retrospective data from all different labs? Well, this is some US data from Genetics, one of the largest reference labs in the world. These are out of the US, day 5 biopsy across about 100 different IVF labs that refer into this one testing lab. And the important thing here is to see the antibody rates well, it looks black here, it looks red on my screen. In black, increases with maternal age. You can see the maternal age increasing along the bottom. The antibody rate here is going up. That's what we expect to see, obviously. But the most important thing, miscarriage rate is very low, as you can see, under 10%. That's a low miscarriage rate, I think you'll agree. But the important thing is the implantation rate is the same, or pretty much the same, even with increasing age. So doing antibody screening has mitigated the effect of antibody based on maternal age. But there's even more data. This just came out in the last month. The CDC, which is the body in the US that has to collect the validated and verified data from all of the IVF clinics within the US, it's about 400 clinics, just published its outcome data for 2011 and 12. They looked at 97,000 non-PGD cycles, and they looked at 5,500 aneuploidy cycles. They call it PGD there, but it's the same thing. Interestingly, these are only fresh transfers, so there's no frozen transfers, which has become one of the common ways of doing PGS. So they're excluded, and my guess is they'd be very good outcomes. And this is what they found. Women over 35, a decreased risk of miscarriage. So this is across a very big group of patients. Women over 37, decreased risk of miscarriage, and an increased risk of live birth. So this is not trial data, it's not being squeezed to make it look better. This is all the cycles that have been collected. So I think that's pretty convincing. So does it matter which PGS test I use? I've just been saying all of this data is from different platforms, so maybe you shouldn't worry too much about it. But I do want to make a few strong points. So if we look at the evolution of PGS technology, we've gone from the FISH era, and I know there's still some happening here, the array era, looking at all 24 chromosomes, and that's where most of the data has come from, 500,000 clinical tests to date. And we're now into the next generation sequencing era. I've put an Illumina box here, but it could be another box. We happen to think that our technology is better, but you're still going to get an antibody result with another technology. But the important thing to look at is the number of data points. So we've gone from 5, which doesn't even cover all the chromosomes, to 3,000, gives us more confidence in the result, to 1 million data points. So it's not about resolution as such, it's about confidence in the result. So people doing sequencing are saying, I'm really confident that a chromosome is missing because there's so many data points per chromosome. The sad reality is antibody screening, and I used to do it myself using FISH, has been proven ineffective by FISH in many trials, in meta-analyses, and in a large randomized control trial. It's technically difficult, there's a limited number of chromosomes screened, which means we miss a lot of chromosomes, and it's subjective. It involves humans having to make decisions. I've done it myself. I know how difficult it is. Another way of looking at this, I kind of stole this idea from Mark Hughes, who's a real pioneer in pre-implantation genetic testing on embryos. He kind of imagines looking up at the night sky, and this is a bit like doing PGS. So if you look at the night sky with your naked eyes, you see a few stars, and you see a moon, and you maybe see a bit of tree that gets in the way of the stars. That's a bit like doing FISH. The blob that looks like the moon is a bit of fluorescence, autofluorescence that you didn't want to see, because really you're trying to look at the stars. The tree is a bit of a fibre they got on your slide, because it's a very mechanical process. And then we move to array, and that's a bit like looking through a decent telescope. Now you can see all the stars you wanted to look at, and you can see even more stars, you can see more data points. If you look at NGS, it's like using the Hubble telescope. You can see even more resolution. So it's just a way of thinking about it. As I said, you still see the stars if you use 24 short. You still see all of them using an array. But you just get more confidence in the result when you use next generation sequencing. So we certainly think it's the future of PGS, and I think the market is looking like it thinks that's the same too. There's been lots of press releases about next generation sequencing. Another take-home message, what it's not. Next generation sequencing on embryos for antibody detection is not looking at every sequence that the embryo owns. You know, every gene, every little tiny piece of sequence. It's basically counting chunks of chromosome. That's all it's doing. So it's just a more sophisticated way of counting bits of chromosome. We're not interested in the actual sequence level detail. And in fact, at the moment, you don't get that level of detail with any confidence. And we don't want it. I don't want to make decisions about embryos that haven't yet become people. I just want to say, are they normal or abnormal for their chromosomes? So this is just a little bit of information about the product, which is called VeriSeq PGS, launched in June 2014. We've done lot validation against 24 Shore, the array. It's 100% sample concordance. You can run 24 samples maximum per run, which makes it scalable. You can get the samples report within 12 hours, which for most people is quick enough. We are going to be working on shortening that time, so that might be good for places where they want to do a fresh transfer. It's a simple substitution for arrays. The front end is the same, whole genome application, and the back end, the analysis and reporting is the same. Just a bit in the middle, the sequencing part is different. The cost per sample, it varies across regions, so I hate talking about cost, but the idea, and I think you can understand the idea, that if you do something on a scalable solution, it gets cheaper. So the point about this product is, it's more sophisticated, but it should get cheaper. Okay, but I don't want to talk specific prices because that's not my role. The resolution, the true resolution is comparable to 24 Shore, but I can tell you every single customer I've spoken to says, I don't want to call it resolution, but I can see stuff better. I can score it easier. So in a sense, it's better resolution. It's just, it's not validated that way. And you don't need any references. So you just run the samples you've got. You don't need to use extra DNAs. So looking at a few performance characteristics, just the way it looks. The way array data is usually portrayed is you've got the chromosome number on the bottom. You can see 1 to 22 plus X and Y. And you're looking for a shift from this sort of mean line here. You're looking at a shift upwards being a gain of chromosome, or a shift downwards being a loss of chromosome. And here you can see chromosome 9 and I think 18. So this has got 2 antibodies in this particular embryo sample. The same sample run on next generation sequencing, VeriSeq PGS. You can't see it so well because of the light, but basically you get exactly the same results. But you can already see that dynamic range is bigger. So that shift, that abnormality, looks clearer. And obviously with a very clean sample, it's easy to score both. With a noisier sample, where that signal is not so clear amongst the noise, it's easier to do it by VeriSeq PGS. And then just to show you, this is a more complex sample with lots of abnormalities, but you've got the same fidelity, you get the same results when you use the next generation sequencing on MySeq. A great way of validating these kind of samples, because don't forget, when you take an embryo, you don't know if it's antibody or not. And so when you test it, you still don't know, you just have to believe the result. What's really nice is using a translocation couple, where you know the chromosomes that are going to be involved. So in this case, we knew which chromosomes would be involved. This is work done by Genesis Genetics, and they showed 100% concordance between the 24 Shore and their next generation sequencing VeriSeq PGS in 192 samples. And you basically can see the same shifts, but they're clearer again in their next generation sequencing. We also get this improved dynamic range also allows us to look at mosaicism, which is definitely an area of interest and definitely an area of controversy right now. But as you can see here, this little shift, which hasn't reached the line, so it's not a monosomy, is not very clear in the array, but it's much clearer when you get to NGS. And you can titrate that result using cell lines of known abnormality against normal cell lines. And you can titrate down and say, I now know what percentage mosaicism I can detect because I know how many cells I put into the mix. And by doing that and using next generation sequencing, there's been quite a lot of data that's come out recently, but it's a growing body, so I don't want to kind of overstress the value of mosaicism. We're still trying to work out what it is. What we do know, though, is that some mosaic blastocysts, which appear to be abnormal, if you like, do produce normal, healthy babies. And we need to understand more about the extent of mosaicism, the extent of the chromosome abnormality, you know, is it a whole chromosome or partial chromosome, and which chromosomes. So most people would be very unhappy transferring anything abnormal that involved chromosome 13, 18, or 21 for obvious reasons. But maybe people would have a slightly different view of chromosome 1, where if it was abnormal, the chance of getting a pregnancy is virtually 0. But we need to learn more, so we're setting up a working group to understand the results better. So I've told you what I think the advantages, but really the best person to hear telling you about advantages of the technique is a customer. So as I said, one of our largest customers is Genesis Genetics, and Tony Gordon, these are the things he said about NGS versus ACGH. He said the whole chromosome copy number changes. There's no real advantage. So if that's all you're interested in, you can use the array as well. But for sub-chromosomal changes, it looks much more sensitive and specific. For mosaic samples, the detection limit is better for NGS versus ACGH. For noisy samples, which is, this is the kind of pain that you're going to have in a testing lab, is when the sample just doesn't look quite right, but you're not going to rerun it straight away. NGS is more able to determine signal versus noise. You can also detect some common triploides because of the way the output is. It's absolute copy number versus ratios. And it's a scalable solution. And they should know because they run tens of thousands of samples every year. So they need a scalable solution. And that makes it cost effective for large sample volumes. So I think PGS is like a triangle. It's an idea whose time has come. And it's come not because of NGS, it's come because of a confluence of different ideas. One is being able to, in the best hands I'm talking about, produce a decent blastocyst in culture, vitrify the blastocyst, and be able to use a high-quality 24 chromosome screening technique. So those things together, with a good blastocyst biopsy or a good embryo biopsy in general, is going to give you the best results. And we've got customers now with 80% success rates because of using these three things together. And I'm sure each of those things contributes. I don't think it's all PGS, but certainly PGS is having an effect, as you see in the trial data. So I think I've already said when I would test for antibody, I would test at the blastocyst stage, and those are the reasons why. For one thing, and it's important in a price-sensitive market like Saudi, and like many other countries in the region, it's more cost-effective to test fewer embryos. So why test an embryo that's never going to make a blastocyst? And say, yes, it's aneuploid. It wasn't going to make a blastocyst anyway. Now that's not me saying I think blastocysts should always be used. It's just saying I think in a decent prognosis patient who will make blastocysts, don't test the embryos that won't make it in culture. Test the ones that will. So this also leads me to demonstrate why I think frozen is the way forward. It helps the lab to be able to manage these samples. It helps the clinic to be able to manage the patient because you're not waiting for a result to come in the next 2 minutes. You can let the patient go away. You can separate egg retrieval from embryo transfer. So that is the new paradigm, is not to do everything together. Now that's going to require some effort on the part of clinicians and patients to make that change in their heads. They don't pay money, get some eggs, get some embryos, transfer the embryo, go home and hope they're pregnant. Now, they have everything up to egg retrieval, and then they don't see the rest of it, it's a black box. And then they get called, come in and have your normal embryos transferred. That's the new paradigm. That's what's happening in the most successful labs. And then I just put some evidence here saying maybe there's a good reason to do frozen embryo transfer anyway. The outcomes are looking equally good to fresh, and even the children seem to be more like in vivo conceived children than IVF children. So it looks like it's all about stimulated endometrium not being the optimal place for transfer. And I said we're using frozen embryo model in our randomized control trial. It allows sample batching and more time for analysis and counselling, which is particularly important in PGD, maybe not so much in PGS. And we have a randomized trial conducted just FET versus fresh in the UK, and I'm disappointed in a way to find that it won't be complete until 2020. And I think a lot of people will have changed their practice before that's even happened. So my final thing, I'm going to skip through this very quickly, just to say, I'm going to give you the bottom line. Lots of people now are looking at health economics. So they're not just saying, oh, PGS appears to work, here's a bit of randomized data. We need the randomized controlled data. But they're also saying, could it even be cheaper to do one cycle of IVF with PGS versus doing multiple transfers and just facing the consequences? And I've summarized this massively because there's a huge amount of data and factors you have to consider to do these analyses. And I'm not expecting you to believe it, I'm expecting you to consider it and think, I wonder what that would look like in my country, because the numbers will be different, obviously. But basically, a doctor in the US that we work with quite a lot looked at the cost savings per patient per live birth using a model of 1,000 patients. So in under 35s, the benefit was $24,000. Now, bearing in mind per patient, bear in mind that an IVF cycle costs about $20,000 in the US. That means they're saving the cost of another cycle. And then for older patients, it was even better. Almost the price of 2.5 cycles. I don't expect you to believe it and walk away saying, yes, I must do it now. Those numbers will be different for you, but the principle is the same. So my take-home messages, thank you for your patience. I want you to remember that aneuploidy is a problem in all IVF populations. Whether you choose to do something about it or not is your decision, but you can't ignore the fact that it's happening even in young patients. Okay? So you can say, I'll get the result eventually. I'll get the baby eventually, even if I do nothing. But I'm saying, let's take the eventually out of that conversation. Let's say, I'm going to get the result as quickly as possible. Because I think that's what the patients want. I don't think they want eventually. Fish is not the optimal method. I'm sorry, but it's not. Array CGH and/or next generation sequencing allow 24 chromosome aneuploidy testing in lots of different tissues, polar bodies, blastomeres, ultra-effectinome samples, all with high accuracy and reproducibility, and that's very important for a genetic test. Both day 3 and day 5 biopsy today, with the evidence we have today, can show higher implantation rates across all age groups, including good prognosis patients. So I really don't want you to forget about the good prognosis patients. And PGS is going to help people do routine single embryo transfer, and that's going to help to reduce the burden of multiple pregnancy. Recent meta-analyses of the 24-short RCTs have shown improved IVF outcomes, but we all agree it would be better to have more trial data. And I think a very important take-home message is, because it's very important when lots of different labs want to start offering PGS to their patients. If you do bad or poor quality IVF, PGS is not going to rescue it. Okay? PGS is a test you add on top of good IVF and make it better. So saying it's a euploid embryo when the embryo is going to die anyway in culture because it's not being looked after properly, it doesn't matter. And in fact, it's going to give PGS a bad name because people are going to say, that looked like a good embryo and it failed. So I think we need best practice for biopsy, cell preparation, interpretation of the results we get, vitrification, and all aspects of IVF as soon as possible. Now luckily we're working with groups to try and do that. We're not just focusing on PGS. And that's one of the reasons why I think Illumina and our affiliates in different countries is why you would choose Illumina for PGS. And I joined Illumina and I really believe they believe in the mission. This is not about saying, I've got a sequencer, what can I use it for? Hey, why don't we do IVF? I think they really believe in improving human health and particularly reproductive health. So we've got websites, we've got clinical geneticists and counsellors that are available to talk to. We've got patient-centered materials for your clinic. I think we brought a few just examples along so you can see, you can get them branded with your own clinic. We run embryo biopsy and technical embryology workshops to train embryologists. Obviously we run training workshops for people running the actual test as well. But in this room, I think most people are interested in accessing the technology, not running the test. We have expert technical support both locally and remotely. And we've got continued development of products and commitment to PGS and to the IVF space. And I don't see any of our competitors doing that, honestly. I'm not here to say they're bad, not at all. But I see they have good technologies which they retrofit into IVF. They're not committed to the space in the same way we are. We've got the largest body of clinical evidence, loads of hundreds of publications. We've got the largest clinical community. So if you start doing PGS, what do you want? You want to know that you're in a family of people that are doing things in a certain way and have a lot of evidence behind them. That's what I really want. And we're a member of the Global Fertility Alliance. This is with a founder member. There's 3 groups, Merck Serrano, who will be familiar to you from their pharmaceutical range, and Genea Biomedics, which is a medical device company in Australia that's come out of Sydney IVF, so a great track record for IVF. And what we're trying to do is not to sell more products. What we're trying to do is improve IVF. So we're currently writing papers, holding roadshows, with the sole aim of telling people what they could do better to improve their IVF, irrespective of using technology, extra technology. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alan, for comprehensive talk and good marketing. Okay, folks, if you're thinking of having these units, it's very cheap. You can always write and ask for a couple of machines, but make sure you have something like a couple of million in the account to run it. Okay? So that's what's all about marketing. But let me tell you a tiny little story. In the last ashram in the States, our group, we were negotiating with a group that invented a technology for transferring mitochondria to improve fertilization, implantation, pregnancy rates in poor responders and a small number of eggs. We could not convince them to bring the price of the technology less than 50,000 American dollars. Can you imagine? You will ask a patient to pay 200,000 riyals, almost $250,000. If you add all the rest, medication and investigation, it will be $250,000. And you cannot guarantee that she will have a baby. Can you imagine the prices, that is what is happening in the field of infertility? Anyway, a tiny little story just to keep you from being bored. Dr. Ghazi is the director of all the centers and the genetic laboratory. I think he is the best guy who can tell you about a tiny little bit about our history, but best of all, our residents. I'm sure he will be able to say a lot about it.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you.